Hey everyone, welcome to the Ironman Texas North American Championships race breakdown and analysis where every second mattered again for the second race of the Ironman Pro Series. What a race this was. There were some unbelievable performances and stories coming out of this one. We literally witnessed some history in the making, statements were made, and we saw some things we've never seen before. There was $175,000 in prize money on offer and 6 slots to the world champs for both the men and the women. So here are my top takeaways from those races. And sorry this is coming out a little bit behind, but I promised I was going to keep doing those. I'm going to stick to it. So starting with the men's, it was a brutal day, as is typical in Texas, but it was extra brutal this day with some tough winds out on course, especially out on the bike, and it made it a much slower day than usual for most. And that was really highlighted with an exceptional amount of athletes not finishing the race, especially on the men's side. 16 in total out of the 57 that started, 15 DNFs and 1 disqualification. So starting off with the swim, the pace was hot in this race. Clearly, some guys were trying to get a gap on some of the strong bikers in the field. And right away, Menno Koolhaas is my first takeaway. He looks like the real deal following his 6th place in Miami. He swam so well here and was biking tremendously well before he actually got disqualified because he didn't serve a penalty he received at the first penalty tent, which is what you're supposed to do. So terrible luck from that Dutch athlete who made the trip all the way to the States just to be disqualified for not serving his penalty right away. But he was leading the race there on the swim with a couple other guys. But Matthew Marquardt was also there at the front of the swim. And man, he just looked next level on the bike and really showed off the aerodynamic testing he's been doing with Watch Shop. He had double bottles on, not quite like Joe Skipper did last year at this race, but clearly it was working because somehow with those ridiculous headwinds, he rode almost two minutes faster than Rudy Von Berg did last year without those harsh conditions. I think most of us thought he had the race in the bag by the time he got out onto the run. But then Patrick Lange was another big takeaway of mine. He moves into first place in the Ironman Pro Series after his second place result here. He started a minute back in the swim with Braden Curry, really showing just how good his swim has been in recent times. But man, he does struggle on bike courses like this, and I personally think he'll really have to improve when all the big dogs are back in Kona, the likes of Magnus Ditlev. I think he had help here with all the packs, and I fear if he's left by himself, he could spell real trouble despite his amazing run form. I just don't think if he's 15 minutes back when he gets into transition in Kona, I don't think there's too much he can do to win another world title. And then we had arguably 2 of his biggest competitors for the Ironman Pro Series, Braden Curry and Joe Skipper, drop out of this race about 5 miles into the run. Now, Joe was having a terrible day right off the start, coming down 8 minutes from the front out of the swim. One of his worst ever swims, which he said he really has no excuses for. And then after working really hard on the bike and catching up to the group that Patrick Lange was actually in, he began feeling sick, and eventually it just went from bad to worse and he had to pull out. He actually says he's now going to chase Ironman Cairns, which I imagine Braden Curry will too, to get their Pro Series back up and running. He's also on the start list for the Challenge Championships in a couple weeks, so that might be a bit of a backup plan for him to chase some challenge races. But yeah, really not a good start for Joe, who doesn't have many points on the board now for the Pro Series. And then Braden Curry, he was in altitude for a few weeks before this race after Oceanside, and it looks like that just didn't go quite to plan for him, and he'll have to play some catch up in this series as well. And these guys doing more and more races, it's going to be really hard for them to peak for the right ones and for the big ones. But then moving on to somebody who had a great day, and that was Robert Callan. I think this guy is one to watch. He biked like a monster. Marquardt applauded him for getting up to the front with him, and he was super happy he did. He kind of reminds me of Magnus Ditlev, actually. Tall, slender guy with some serious bike power. I'd keep an eye on him because he actually is returning from injury as well and hasn't had too much consistent running leading up into this. One spot we all saw on the broadcast was when he had a strange crash out of nowhere. his chain actually dropped going up a hill, and that obviously didn't help his overall result, but he impressively stayed the course and finished in 5th place. And then finally, we're on to who you all want to hear about, and that is Tomas Rodriguez Hernandez. What in the world did we just watch? He was running a marathon pace I don't think we've ever seen before at the beginning of a marathon. He was on pace for running a 2:27 marathon. He was not messing around. He said he was running 2 laps for show, and that's exactly what happened. He ran the first half in 1:13, and it really began to make us all think that we might see the first ever sub 2:30 marathon in a race that had Patrick Lange, but it wouldn't be from Patrick Lange. None of us could have called it. He's from Mexico. He trains at high altitude near Mexico City, and he is so comfortable in the heat. He said it didn't faze him at all. He ran a 2:38 actually in the crazy heat of Cozumel in his first Ironman marathon. So we knew it was possible he could do something good here, but nothing like what we saw. He said the swim was really easy for him. He was right there with Patrick Lange. And then his bike is what a lot of people actually say won him this race. I wouldn't go that far, but I do think it kept him in it. He came out only 12 minutes and 45 seconds back into T2, which gave him the gap he needed on Patrick Lange in the end. He was getting a real nail-biting there as he slowed down and even walked at an aid station. It was really hard for me to watch because I really wanted to see him pull off the underdog upset, and thankfully he did. And he, I can tell you, has a ton of Mexican supporters who were just beside themselves for that result. It was the first ever time a Mexican had won a professional Ironman race. He had the 5th fastest run split in Ironman history, and he picked up a 5,000 Pro Series points here to add to his 582 points that he had from Oceanside, which is again another reason why no one would have guessed he would have got this result, because he was 45th there and he actually ran a 1:23 half. But you know, at the end of the day, even his 45th there counts. It gave him those 582 points, because every second counts as a point in these Pro Series races. But one of the biggest things I think people should be talking about with Tomas is his confidence. In his post-race interview, he just exuded it. Hey, he believes he can run a 2:28 marathon.
Like 2:28.
And what do you think? Is Tomas now the one to watch in the Pro Series? Is he the one who's going to challenge Patrick Lange? Let me know what you think down below. But on to the women's race now, which had equally, if not more, drama. So starting off with the swim, Lauren Brandon led the way, but unlike the men's, it was a little bit slower than last year. She was looking strong on the bike too after that swim, but unfortunately, she picked up a flat, and that meant her day wouldn't go to plan, and eventually she just barely hung on. And then I was really impressed with Fenella Langridge on the swim, managing to stay with her, as well as former pro swimmer Lotte Wilms and Rebecca Clark, so she's got to be happy with that, and that's exactly now where she's got to be in every race. Then Fenella and Lotte Wilms were the ones who were really pushing on in the bike at the front, and they really set themselves up to have the best result they possibly could have, coming off into T2 with a serious lead. But I just think these two will have to up their run game in order to compete with the likes of Kat Matthews. But doing so during a busy season like this one can be extremely tough, and it'll be interesting to keep an eye out on. But who I was most impressed with on the swim was actually Kat Matthews, because she swam 2.5 minutes quicker than she did here last year and actually outswam Joe Skipper. She was in the perfect position to do some damage on the bike and defend her title. But then things started to go wrong for her. She lost her nutrition early on the bike, still managed to hold the power she was wanting to, and was blazing along this course. Clearly, like Matthew Marquardt, taking advantage of her aerodynamic testing and position and making it through that headwind with ease compared to the other athletes. But then she picked up a penalty alongside last year's runner-up, Maya Stage Nielsen. And apparently she didn't know what for right away. The referee didn't tell her. She said she had to ask about 8 times.
I had to ask about 8 times
before she was told it was for drafting. And in her post-race interview, she said that she thinks some education might be needed on Race Ranger, especially on a course like that one. But I think it is an interesting talking point. Is Race Ranger going to be useful if referees don't quite know how to use it and in what situations, or if there aren't clear guidelines for them, then it still makes refereeing pretty subjective and can still be frustrating for the pros. It'll be interesting to see how it develops and if now it results in more penalties at Pro Series races. Remember, like I just said, Menno Koolhaas was disqualified on the men's side as well, and he believes that one shouldn't have been a penalty. But that wasn't the last of Kat's dramas, because onto the run, and that calf tear that she suffered in Miami came back to haunt her a little bit, as 1.5 kilometers in, she believed it was done. She had some serious tightness there, and she thought she might have to pull out. She had to deal with a lot of anxiety and discomfort, but she always does. She battled through, and she managed to make it work. She had to walk some aid stations and measure her effort, but she did it so well. It was nerve-wracking to watch as Penny Slater was coming, and she said she couldn't believe she held her off in the end. It's just going to be really interesting to see if she's able to pull off all these high-level races, and if it'll eventually catch up to her. But you just cannot doubt her resilience and mental strength, and I just can't wait to see more. But it was actually Penny Slater who is my number one takeaway from this women's race. She had a lifetime best performance of second here. She picked up 90 PTO points and flies up the rankings because she toughed it out like I've never heard someone do in a long time. And a lot of that she attributes to the Pro Series and knowing that there was so much on offer for this race. She said she suffered serious GI issues before the race and was vomiting before the race started, and then out onto the bike 20 or 30 minutes in, she was vomiting again. And could you imagine dealing with that in an Ironman, in an insane headwind on that toll road, and then feeling sick the rest of the bike and knowing you have a marathon to go? I don't know how she managed to chug along and get into that second place position. She now puts herself as a top competitor for the series, and I hope she's earned herself a lot of fans. I cannot wait to see her race again. But back to Lotte Wilms, who finished in third place here, because she is really impressing me lately. She's only been racing as a pro for about 2.5 years after transitioning from being a professional swimmer. And she just keeps getting better and better, even though she's 40 years of age. And actually, it's really interesting that the top 10 females here, the average age was 35 years old, which goes to show me there's going to be lots of room for up-and-coming Ironman female triathletes in the future years. But Lotte is just, consistently improving and is always going to be at the front of these races. Hannah Berry finished in 4th, and again, another one who I think could be in the top 5 of this whole series. She's an excellent 70.3 athlete. To be able to pull off a good 4th in a good field like this, I think she'll be happy with that. And then finally, Fenella Langridge, back to her one more time. I think she'll be a little disappointed with this one, finishing in 6th. She said she did suffer breathing problems on the run and had to stop for large amounts of times. So still more to go from Fenella, although she does sit on top of the series standings for now with her race in Oceanside County. But next up for the Ironman Pro Series for the men and women is 70.3 St. George this weekend before 70.3 Mallorca the following week. Both have stacked start lists and are broadcast races. It is just such a good time to be a triathlon fan right now. So let me know your thoughts about this race. Thank you again for watching. Have a good one. I'll see you in the next one.